Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. We are in the midst of season 1 dedicated to reanimating young Frankenstein. I'm your host, Alan Sanders.
And I'm your co-host, Walt Murray.
And our guests once again today joining us here because they heard representatives with the FCC were headed to their normal hangout. Welcome back, Barry King and Mike Clark from the nostalgic geeky radio show, BK on the Air.
Hey, I thought that we were done with that. I thought we were doing Willy Wonka now.
But yeah.
No.
We're not?
No.
Okay. Show notes.
Well, great.
It's Silver
So it's
Street,
going like our radio show.
Okay.
Silver Street.
That's perfect. Yeah, thanks for having us here. We're glad to be here.
You know, things move so fast while you're here, but not quite that fast. We're still diving through young Frankenstein. And when we last had you guys in studio, we were looking at the young doctor saying to Igor, you need to get down here. You could get electrocuted. And it starts off with, what's the hurry in this minute 43? But it will end with Dr. Frankenstein sensually rubbing his creature's chest as Inga begins to sensually rub Frankenstein's hand.
I think she's got designs on the doctor.
Start to think of Terry Garr.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think that where he hasn't a single bit of interest in her in that way, at least we haven't seen it, Walt, she's starting to feel a little of the student-teacher affection.
I think he has no clue. I think he is.
Oh, he's obviously clueless.
Scientific.
Oh, he's obsessed.
Guy.
He's totally focused.
Totally focused in what he's doing, and she is very interested in him, and he has no idea.
You think she's ready to start studying under the doctor?
I think she is.
Wow. Okay.
She wants a little tutelage.
She's looking to settle down and have some little Frankensteins.
Little Frankenstein.
Little Frankensteins.
I get the picture of these little tiny midget Frankenstein tots. Frankentots.
But legally,
There's
they
a
can't
garbage
have
pail,
flat
kid.
heads.
Frankentot.
Yeah, they just can't have flat heads.
That's right, or they'd be sued.
That's the only rule. You can do everything, including the exact same gear we use.
Make them like the
We're
classic
cool with
one.
it, but I swear to God, if I see a flat head, you're done.
And bolts in the neck.
Sonic Boom.
Hashtag lawsuit. Yeah.
I don't even remember reading anything about the bolts. I just know the big thing I read was they did not want a flat head.
It is a
The
flat
squared
head.
off head. That's
Yep,
right.
squared
we
off head.
talked about them. Very, very guarded of that trademark they've got. So I wonder if they didn't say
Because
take those shoes
honestly,
off.
without the flat head, I would not have had any idea this was Frankenstein's movie.
no
Thank
clue.
God.
It is nothing like a Frankenstein movie.
I mean, we don't have a 6'5",
No.
70-inch wide monstrous gorilla
Gorilla.
wearing a giant overcoat that's his arms are too big to fit in, and giant big boots and lumbering. Like, no, nothing.
And a guy
like the
named
original.
Dr. Frankenstein
No.
in the movie.
No, we'll just say we get around that copyright by calling him Frankenstein
Frankenstein.
for more than 75% of the film, and therefore it doesn't matter.
Or Frau Blucher.
People universal.
Intellectual
And Igor.
property law.
They're counting them. They're counting the times they say that on the bean count.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Well, we do start off this minute with the continual conversation, or the shouting, actually, between Igor wearing his Gordon's fisherman outfit at the top of the, well, I don't know, what do you call that? The top of the spire of the laboratory? I mean, what do you call that opening at the top?
Frankenstein's cutout.
I would say it.
Every
Is it like a
Frankenstein's
turret?
lab has one.
Oh, it does. Well, that's how the
It's-
lightning gets in.
Is that how you get to the belfry? Up
Well,
there, I
it's
guess?
where
I don't know.
the table
castle?
rises up and
Yeah.
it fills in that space.
It's the bird's nest.
The bird's nest. Okay.
bird's nest?
We call it the-
If I ever win the lottery, I'm building a house that looks like that. I want
Yeah.
a lab
With
and
an
millions of dollars.
upstairs.
Yes.
Yes.
And a Terry
up
Gar-
top.
and a Terry Gar.
I want a Terry Gar.
And a Terry Gar.
with it. And her
I don't think you can
beautiful-
afford that.
Her beautiful manicured, perfect hands in the scene where she pulls in and touches the doctor's hand. She has a very manicured
yes.
hand there on the and we know about her wardrobe.
All good lab assistants do.
Well, and she's
even Dwight Fry did in the original.
She's always
Was
very
he
nervous looking when, he's kind of barking orders and taking charge, and she's always kind of fiddling with her fingers and kind of
She's so
looking a little
innocent and
frantic.
nervous,
And then you got Igor, who's running around like a lunatic.
Wait, well, I think the only thing she's interested in is the doctor.
I think so.
She
What
doesn't really
else,
care about
is
the
her contribution
experiment.
to be there other than being told what to do by him?
Of course.
She
Well, we
doesn't
do
really
find
much
out
anything else.
later he does admit that she's very helpful in the lab.
Right. So's a monkey.
Yes.
So's a trained monkey if you could train one.
Not for the same reasons.
No.
Hey, if we had to rank in terms of who you would trust with a particular job, if you gave somebody a task list that said, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, who do you trust more, Inga or Igor?
Well, of course, if he sent Inga to get the brain, we wouldn't have the problem.
We wouldn't.
Exactly.
Or the rest of the movie.
The rest of the film.
So we're all Team Inga when it comes to who we would
Comes to
trust.
that, yes.
Yes.
But when it comes to having two eyes that go in different directions, I'm Team Igor all the
Yes.
way.
Yeah, only he knows how to do
Well,
that.
and I think Igor is fairly competent, but again, there's that tension between he and Frederick Frankenstein that he continues to kind of kick the hornet's nest with. And, he really does try to control that relationship for the most part. So he's a little bit unpredictable. She is not a well-trained scientific mind and doesn't know the equipment there in the lab and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, it kind of goes back and forth. If you maybe catch Igor at a good moment,
What you're saying, it's good to have both of them.
it's good to have both of them.
Well,
One
and
is
Igor
smart
is very
one.
much like Fritz in the 31 because it's the same thing. He was helpful and handy, but there was that tension. So perfect. Unfortunately, there's no Inga in 31.
Yeah. You get the idea, though, that the Igor, or like in Dracula, the Renfield character, the Igorish character that's helping him.
Both Dwight Fry.
The evil henchman.
Dwight Frog,
Yeah.
It's always short and hunched over.
Yes.
They could change and bat for the other team at any moment. He could betray you at any time.
Well, of course.
Because their loyalties never stay.
Well,
So
and
I don't
again-
exactly trust Igor or Igor.
No,
to that,
because
to that
remember,
extent.
even Fritz started tormenting the monster, and that's
Right.
really what made it go on its rampages and stuff. I could see Igor doing that too
in a minute.
in a minute.
Yeah, and just for fun.
Yep.
Well, and the gag here with them yelling up to him and then all of a sudden he appears right next to him. It's kind of an interesting, obviously it's a great gag, but in the 1931, Igor descends on a rope.
Yes,
He comes down. That's
he
right.
climbs down a rope. and-
Fritz, you mean
Fritz.
Fritz.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And you just
They're all
watched it not too
interchangeable.
long
I know
ago.
they
yeah,
are.
and it's funny because it takes him forever, and it's like being in gym class in high school and watching somebody come down that rope. But this was such a great gag to pull to get him from here to there.
Whether it's Fritz, Igor, we'll just call him Frigor.
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 They're all Renfield. They're all slimy names.
Well, the Igor, the Lugosi one, didn't have a humpback. He had been hung and his neck was broken, but
Right.
it didn't kill him.
They always
No,
have
but
a
Fritz
deformity.
walked with a hunch. He
A
was all
little
yeah.
bit, yeah.
And he had
Because he
that
had to have a
cane.
walking cane.
Yeah, he had the cane in his
the same
boot.
little half cane to
Yeah.
walk across the lab to pick up the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Not
gonna
only
cure
did
him.
Gene Wilder borrow from all the films, he put them in a blender and just poured it out. And said,
Exactly.
look, it's Frankenstein smoothie.
Exactly.
This is official sequel. I'm telling you, this falls in with all of
Yes.
them. This is what happened
But
later.
there's no Dr. Pretorius in here.
Well, that's all right.
I know.
It still
Well, there may
works,
have
though.
been, but it may have been cut out.
Right.
That's true.
There's a
like
lot.
several of the scenes.
Yeah, and as we've said before, I mean, this movie's already jam-packed, and they
Oh, yeah.
had to cut a lot. So I think if they had added any more of those types of characters, it really starts to
They've been
get
too
very
crowded.
convoluted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's hit on something we haven't talked about yet for at least the last 2 minutes that we've been covering, and that's the score by John Morris. And it's prominent in the upcoming scene and part of this one. John Morris, and he just passed away as of the recording of this podcast. He just passed away. Was it this year? Or
January.
January of
this year.
2018. Did the music for most of Mel Brooks movies. A great space score for Spaceballs,
Oh, yeah.
which ripped off everything else. But he also did serious soundtracks too. But the soundtrack for Young Frankenstein, it is not a comedic soundtrack. It is a straightforward orchestrated horror Frankenstein-ish classic sounding movie score that works with this movie, and it's really the only thing. If they'd went with the comedy sounding noises of Looney Tunes or Warner
Right,
Brothers
yeah, we don't have any
score,
kazoos
that
or
would-
whistles or
that
things
would've-
like that.
Again, they would have lost the credibility of this movie of being what it is.
And I would argue that had Mel Brooks made this movie even 20 years later, chances are we would have gotten more of that rather than less.
Right, and we would have got more of what Mike discussed earlier, and we talked about with Mel's movies tended to move into the category of the Zucker brothers. I don't know why he went into their direction, because he came before them into that slapstick stuff, which they're good at. Their movies are funny, but Spaceballs and some of his later films are like that. He used that kind of comedy, and I think he suffered from that. So along with the score being different, like you said it would be, I think his directorial, if he made this a few years back,
well, again,
like the 80s or 90s,
look at Dracula Dead and Loving It. Again, trying to recapture Young Frankenstein, and it just does not work.
Failed miserably.
Well, and one thing that we've talked about with this movie is you have so many times where it's a bait and switch. You're left off guard because you don't know whether a jump scare is coming or a comedy hook is coming. And the music adds to that tension because it keeps you in the mind that this is a monster movie. And, you're on guard waiting for that jump scare because the music is so strong, and then they zing you with some crazy joke.
I can see why the producers were reluctant with Mel on this, because at the time, nobody had really kind of done that, at least. They're like, are you going to film it in black and white? Are you kidding me? Almost everyone has color sets in America now and around the world. Black and white. You're going to make it like Frankenstein was, but you're going to make it a comedy, but it's not going to be slapstick. You're going to do this, do that. Thank goodness for Alan Ladd Jr. is what I say.
Absolutely.
Go forward to giving him the confidence and believing in him and doing it. Alan Ladd Jr. made a lot of good decisions, including Blade Runner for Ridley Scott. A lot of things. Alan Ladd thought farther ahead than a lot of people.
Oh yeah, visionary.
It feels like we say this multiple times with each of these shows, but there's a reason why Young Frankenstein still holds up to this day, and some of the later Mel Brooks films, which were successful in the box office, just didn't age well. Whether the comedy just didn't evolve enough, or there was too much of it that 10 years later, you go back and watch. He's like, wait a minute, I don't know what they're parodying anymore.
Especially Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Robin Hood Men in Tights has the worst dated jokes in it.
Yes.
It was funny when I first saw it.
Oh yeah,
I knew
it was.
What was going on. But no, you're right. You can't watch it now like you can watch Young Frankenstein with the same love.
I made the mistake of watching Spaceballs not too long ago, and I thought it was going to be so much funnier because I remembered how much fun I had watching it the first time in the theater. But I was a teenager. All the movies that he was parodying were still fresh in my head. So those jokes worked. All of a sudden, I watched it this last time, and I was like, not quite as good. It's got some funny bits. There's no doubt there's funny bits. And even a couple of clever ones. But for the most part, nowhere close to what we're watching here with Young Frankenstein.
And two, I think at the time when Spaceballs came out, I was just happy that he was parodying the sci-fi genre. I'm like, great, he's doing a genre that I love. This is going to be great. At the time, I thought it was. You're right.
Well, and that's unfortunately, Spaceballs, though, really only appeals to fans of that genre. Whereas, like Young Frankenstein, you don't have to be a fan of the horror genre to get the jokes, and it's a funny movie. Or Blazing Saddles, you don't have to love Westerns to get these bits. Whereas these later ones, you kind of almost have to be a fan of that genre.
Well, and the difference is the time, too, because when you think of 1931 all the way through the 30s Frankenstein monster movies, he was 35, almost 40 years removed when he decided to do this in terms of the generation, right? He wasn't parodying the movies that had come out that year.
The Universal monster movies, especially the Universal and Hammer, had a renaissance in the mid to late 60s. So, there were model kits were coming out. That's when, Munsters, Addams Family thing. So to make Young Frankenstein isn't too far removed. So monsters were in the consciousness.
Oh, no, I'm not saying they weren't in the conscious. I'm just saying you had the Munsters, a parody version, a comedy version.
Oh, yeah.
You had Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Once again, after World War II, you're having
40s,
you're having this sort of reversal. We're not scared of the monsters. We're mocking the monsters.
Right. And they said society was to blame for that because when the Universal monsters first came out, Frankenstein, Dracula, King Kong, some of those things, we were in a depression. The country was in the early stages of, war going on overseas or starting to bubble over there. And we were worried and things were scaring us. They went to the movies and it was even scary in the movie. Well, in the 50s, World War II was over. In the 50s, we had that renaissance of society and everything was great and the fabulous 50s were going on. So they took the horror films in the 50s and turned them into comedies is what they did. There was really no horror in the 50s with those characters. They were all turned into comedies with Abbott Costello. They made light of them. They kind of made fun of them. But then
Hammer.
But then when that was over, Hammer came out in the late 50s and early 60s and turned it back into horror again. It was time for that to come back around again. So there is this big circle kind of going on.
Well, and the reason the monsters weren't as scary anymore is because of the horrors of World War II.
Right.
That was the true thing.
But this movie was made in 1974. So Vietnam, I don't know if it ties into it or not, but Vietnam was, it was, I guess, about over, getting close, I guess. Was it Vietnam ended in 75?
Yeah, we were
76?
winding down
75,
for sure. Yeah.
So I think it was a ballsy move of Mel Brooks. I almost said Mel Gibson. I do that. They're both Mel's. They're both directors. That's why. Mel Brooks to do this because, as we said, what the stuff he had to go through to get the movie made, color, the budget he needed. How can your star, Gene Wilder, how can he tell you can't be in it? Because Mel actually said he forbid me to be in this movie. I'm like, how can you
it was such a good decision. And it was such a good decision for Mel, whether he realized why Gene was doing that or not. It was a genius move on his part to say, yeah, that's smart.
Mel, we talked about this in one of the earlier ones, Mel Brooks being the Edward Van Sloan character.
Right.
The doctor that's helping him. But see, if he would have been goofy like he usually is, it would have ruined it. Because again, you would have lost that tone.
And we covered that because Alan said he could have been the blind man. That could have been his in-out scene, and he leaves. But the fact that
a lawyer in it, or
the fact that this movie was made in the 70s the way it was, black and white, and to mimic and pay homage to Frankenstein.
I'll give you, he did his first two films, I guess. Really interesting choices because we got a Western where the Western craze was kind of over by that point, and now monster movies where that was kind of going away.
That's right.
Yeah, and his other film that he had before that was The Producers, which did not make money at the box office. It had a mix of reviews at the time.
Right.
So again, he wasn't the megastar that we think of as Mel Brooks. He was still, keep an eye on this kid. He seems like he's got something there, but we're not quite sure. The proof is not yet in the pudding. He never did again what he did in 1974 with the two films back to back, the release of Blazing Saddles in February, and then to have this come out in December of the same year, both off the charts. And if you look, every now and then they do another list of the top 100 comedies of all time. Both Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein are always in the top 10. And often you'll see, sometimes depending on the year that it's released, either one is in the top position.
And even when he made High Anxiety, which is a takeoff on Alfred Hitchcock, Hitchcock had been out of the public eye for a long time. He was still directing movies in the early 70s, but they weren't big hits. Hitchcock movies weren't. So, again, another genre that he...
Of all of Mel Brooks's movies, I love Young Frankenstein, obviously that's what we're doing. The one that I love as much, if not maybe even a little bit more, because I grew up watching Hitchcock with my mom, all the Hitchcock movies, was High Anxiety. And he didn't play a stupid character in it. He was the star of it. So everybody else was around him, and he surrounded himself with all of his typical players. Madeline Kahn, Harvey Korman, Cloris Leachman. So he had some really, really good talent around him, and he managed to do a great job parodying Hitchcock's movies. I told this, Walt, at the very beginning, I almost wish Gene Wilder had a bit part, a walk-on, just so we could include it at some point in this Wilder ride.
Right.
But we can't.
I think High Anxiety is underrated, too.
That's right.
Oh, I think so, too.
And again, with High Anxiety, he treated it just like he did with Young Frankenstein. He paid homage to Hitchcock, but he didn't overplay it. He didn't ham it up. He didn't
that's
go
why
goofball.
it's so good.
That's why it was good, yes.
Well, and you look at where the two of them went, where Mel went and where Gene went, after they stopped working together. Gene's kind of became more, I mean, with a couple of exceptions. I mean, obviously, like Silver Streak and things like that. Those were hard comedies. There were hard comedies there. But then he kind of got into more softer characters that were, more love stories and relationship type things, where Mel Brooks continued down that road of parody and over-the-top humor and things like that.
And Gene even started directing. Too.
Right. Did a lot of writing and things. So obviously two very different personalities that blended perfectly in this movie. But I think in some ways Mel probably brought Gene out a little bit in his comedy, and Gene restrained Mel in his in this movie.
Yep.
There's a reason why I think the three best films of Mel Brooks outside of High Anxiety are the three and the only three that he worked on with Gene Wilder. Because afterwards, they all have funny moments. They're all funny to laugh at. History of the World has some great funny moments, but they're not as good as The Producers, as Blazing Saddles, and as Young Frankenstein. There's something about the pairing of these two guys. I think you hit the nail on the head, Walt. I think it's something Gene Wilder was able to restrain Mel Brooks, and Mel Brooks was able to push Gene, and the two of them both grew in a different way from each other, but they never worked together again, even though they were friends. This was the last time they would ever pair together in a film.
Yeah, and even at Gene's death, you heard Mel with great passion talking about Gene, and I think they influenced each other indelibly throughout the rest of their careers. But and I think scenes like this really show that multi-talented mix that comes to the table, because you have that yelling up to the bird's nest or whatever we're calling the upper room there, the crow's nest,
the turret,
and the turret.
Hey, there she blows.
And then Igor showing up right there beside him, like, what are you talking about? That's just how things work around here.
Well, you're right. And Mel's talking about a lot of these people in this quote. There's a quote from him from the commentary of the DVD and the Blu-ray for Young Frankenstein, where he goes, "There's a bittersweet nature to the commentary as well as watching the film in any context. After all, most of the main cast and Gene has passed away." He even says, "I'm crying even as I look at the credits of this movie." And he did. He surrounded himself with a lot of people, Gene Wilder and a lot of other folks. And it's like that Lennon-McCartney thing with the Beatles. Boy, did they write some great stuff together. Now when they split up, they went their own solo ways, and were really successful, but never quite did the Beatles magic that they had together. So sometimes a team is a great way to put things, and I think it goes the same here with Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks.
I agree with that.
People that worked with Mel Brooks in the old days of television, Sid Caesar on your show of shows, Imogene Coca, you remember her plays the grandmother in Vacation. She was a classic TV actress.
Great.
Even got played Ernest T. Bass and Andy Griffith. Who am I thinking of? Howard Morris.
Right.
They were all part of that early days of television, and Mel was trying to break into television then with them, and they'd interview him later along with Mel once Mel was a big star. And I remember them in the 80s going, "Yeah, Mel Brooks was hanging around us, grabbing at our pants. We hated him. He was the most annoying guy we've ever met in our life." But then again, he finally shined and showed what he could do. He had it in him.
Well, getting back to minute 43, and this is that pendulum swing again, we have a tense scene shouting out, the lightning is crashing, he's worried you could get electrocuted, get down here, do you understand? I said, do you understand? Why are you shouting?
Why are you shouting?
He's like right there. We never see him get down. He's just instantaneously right next to him.
And of course, then they have to look back up to make sure he's still not up there.
Right. How many people have done that even in television? Benny Hill.
Of
it's a
course.
great, quick moment where how did you physically go from there
that
to there?
fast? Yep.
That was impossible, but it's funny.
Yeah,
What I love is
comedy, though.
it's not just the two of them looking up because they both question.
Right.
We were just and you, but even he goes, "Yeah, no, I'm not up there."
Exactly.
He's not up there.
And then he even asked him, he said, "Did you just tie off the..." And he's almost thinking, there are two of them.
Yes.
And he's like, "Yeah, no, I tied it off."
Maybe there are two Igors.
Maybe there are.
That's it.
And that's the only time you see the other one.
That could
and
be.
he kind of goes into hiding afterwards.
Yes. He got a little house
There's another
up there.
theory for you.
You just
he
blew
just
my
lives on the
mind.
ceiling.
He just ties off kites.
That's right. Yeah. He's the keeper of the violin and the giant speaker microphone up there that they play later to get the creature back. That's right. I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
Well, once the doctor and Inga decide that okay, he actually is really down here. I'm not sure how. Let's get back to what we're doing. He tells Igor to go start the generator. And this is where I had the problem yesterday. I said, this is coming up. I have a huge issue with why they need the lightning when they've got a frickin' generator the size of one wall of the entire of the side of the laboratory. Because, first of all, they've got electricity already somewhere because they had overhead lights they clicked on several minutes back. Now they've installed or at least upgraded the generator. Even at this time, the generator's putting out alternating current. Lightning is direct current. The two don't mix very well together. Ask anyone whose house has been hit by a bolt of lightning.
They sure don't complement each other.
Perhaps they need one surge of electricity.
Yes. That lightning can
that
only provide.
lightning can provide.
Yes, because it's
So
very
why is he
powerful.
having to generate? This is where I'm going to allow my real world physics has
I'll
a
tell you
problem
the real
with this.
reason.
because the machines have to be powered by the
the
generator
real reason is
that then convert the lightning to a form of
that's
usable
good. I
energy.
like
No,
that.
let him roll.
Yeah.
Keep it. Okay,
Yeah,
no.
keep going.
Okay.
Oh no! I used to
need
do
you
the
to
no
talk me
prize
off the
thing.
ledge.
Let's peel this onion.
Yes,
No,
that's why
I'm on the ledge. You need to talk me back in through the window. Okay. I'm with you. The
Yep.
generator runs the gear, but the gear needs what?
it needs power of its own.
Okay.
that
Incredible
then-
power.
Incredible power. But then when the lightning hits the kites, is sent into this machine that the generator is running, it converts that energy into a form that is usable to bring the monster to life. It creates the life-giving energy.
Which is unexplainable.
That is
It's
unexplained.
like the Bermuda Triangle. It's like there's no explanation.
So
It just
That's the
doesn't.
spark of life.
This so this is the 1.21 gigawatts, right? And it's going to get
Whatever
us.
it is, yes.
Yeah.
We go back in time and bring somebody back from when they were still alive.
Yes. No.
It creates.
Maybe there's a giant capacitor that needs to be charged via the lightning, and then it discharges, and it's separate from the regular alternating current. What was that?
That was lightning.
I think I think the FCC guys that you dodged might have figured out where you are.
Yeah, they know where we are now.
It creates the Strick-Faden effect.
Well, I can tell you if my dad is
And now your car alarm is going.
Wait a minute.
Well, there'd be an edit here.
What is your problem, Alan?
Here come the gremlins.
Apparently, the lightning gods aren't happy with me.
Well, that's why I always take my keys out of my pocket so that I don't pop my trunk open.
Do you notice every time we've mentioned Kenneth Strick-Faden, something weird has happened?
Yeah,
every time
I
I've
noticed.
Said the
It's
name.
like
I think
he's
he was
here
here
with
with
us.
us.
It's the Strick-Faden effect.
There you go.
Say that 3 times.
Now we're saying
there went my
Strick-Faden.
car.
Strick-Faden effect.
We got to stop that. And I'm glad you don't drive the electric car anymore.
Oh my gosh,
You'd
I'd
have
be in
big
huge
problems.
My
trouble.
poor old Jeep will just fly apart.
There's a portal that opens. Maybe that's how Igor gets down.
It is. It's a portal.
And he just teleports.
Yeah, he
down.
teleports.
He doesn't
Opens
say-
a wormhole.
The kite
and
isn't
slides
there
down.
to help make the monster alive. It's to get him down.
He doesn't say
Exactly.
Brooker. He goes, Strick-Faden. Strick-Faden. He just
Well,
flashes down.
I'll just use the wisdom of my dad. If my dad is listening to this, I know right now he's going, it's just a damn movie.
That's really true. That's
You idiots are overthinking this.
if you have no other explanation and cannot come up with another one, that's it.
Yeah.
It's in the script.
Well, no, and what's great, no, you
how many
remember,
people
being
just
comic
went-
reader, Marvel no prizes.
Right.
If they had a
Find
mistake in
and
the
you-
comic,
and you explain it.
you explain why it's not a mistake,
Right.
they send you a
They
no
say
prize.
No prize.
A no prize. Okay.
Yes.
So I need somebody today to go to our Facebook listeners group. And if you're not a member, you need to go ahead and apply. It's really easy. You just have to answer a couple of quick questions, but we just need to make sure we don't have bots coming in to be part of our private listeners
Absolutely.
group. And if you can explain how the AC and DC mix, I'm almost in Camp Commander Clark, but I still have the issue of when the lightning hits, it goes everywhere and there's no way to contain it and control it unless you had a lightning rod to divert it, which we obviously are not trying to divert. We're trying to attract.
Yes, we want.
AC and DC don't usually go well together unless they're on tour.
yes.
Wait for it.
Wait for it. Barry took him like 5 seconds. He almost was like, oh, I get it.
He was like, really? Did you just say that? Well, I'd also like for people to go out to our listeners group and tell us whether you agree that your dad would go, yeah, it's just a movie.
It's just a movie. Move along. Come on, guys. I'm almost to work listening to this podcast. I hate when you guys go
No,
over.
I'd say being Star Trek fans, this is what we do.
That's what we do.
I just kind of accept
And
it
everybody
because
can
the
relate to
creature
that.
come back to life. I can accept that
Yeah.
too. So
Obviously, I'm okay with almost everything in this movie. I had an issue with the coffin. I had an issue with the mechanics of the of a revolving bookcase. So here's the third kind of like physics, real world thing that has intruded. But for the most part, I've accepted everything else. I'm okay with a hump that changes from side to side and
That makes a
Igor-
sound.
Yeah, and apparently it's hollow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we get it again here when he clamps him on the back. We hear the thunk.
And
And
then
he
he took
notices it's moved.
and then he took a train from America to Europe without changing trains or
getting
flying or
I
getting
did
on a
see
boat.
once.
Well,
Yeah.
he did change. Remember the train decor change. We had our
that's true.
we had our German consultant Malta Dirks who kind of weighed in on what was going on in that scene.
That's true. That's true. We'll allow it.
Yeah, we just have to fill in some blanks here and there, like how Igor gets from up there to down there in the split second. All right, so
It's
he
just
goes-
Igor.
He tells Igor to get over to the generator, and then he turns around and says, "Can you imagine that?" Actually, I think this is in the script, but this is not in the flick. He says, "Can you imagine that brain in this body?" And Inga says, "Oh, Frederick, you're not only a great doctor, you're almost a," and he says, "A god?" "Yes, I know." All that cut out.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Well, that would be consistent with the 1931. I mean, that would be right there. I mean, and I think that, as BK was saying earlier, that this is he is adopting that God syndrome. And this is becoming a real study in in this maniacal, crazy mental illness of his.
But I'm glad they didn't leave that line in like that, because I think they've made Gene portrays the Doctor in this movie, especially in the creation scene, the beginning of it here too. He plays it just enough to where you don't hate him.
That's true.
You hate the Doctor in the other films, but
you don't get
wanna
that he's arrogant or
you don't want to
anything.
make your Frankenstein in a comedy, and with Gene Wilder too. Of
Yeah.
course, I can't think of Gene Wilder as a bad guy ever. You don't want to make him that way and push him over that side, because that's that would, I think that would change the whole tone too. We already tell he's turning into his grandfather a little bit here.
Oh, yeah.
he's
He's
moving in
obsessed.
that direction, but he's not. He wouldn't take a. I mean, you don't think he'd take another life to make one like his
No,
dad
and
did,
I don't ever see him as maniacal
No.
or mean or anything.
Well,
like
depending
that.
how you mean that, because he can play almost the maniac without being menacing. Remember, we had Adam Boyer, our actor, who came on several weeks back. He said, if you took Gene Wilder and put him in his most menacing, angry face, and I came at you with a smile, you'd still rather be in Camp Gene than with me.
Very
It's
true.
Gene Wilder's face. That's right.
Well, you
Very
could
much
never
so.
cast Gene in Silence of the Lambs or anything like that. I mean, he does not have that personality or...
Whether he likes it or not, that kind-hearted, genuine quality that is deep down Gene Wilder comes through in every performance, which makes him able to do this role without hating him.
Yes.
Right. And you could cast him in Silence of the Lambs, but he would have to be Agent Starling.
Right.
He wouldn't be
Right. True. Good
He
point.
wouldn't even work as that
Good
either.
point.
But you're never as Hannibal. You're right.
I mean, when you think about the way he played Willy Wonka is very similar. You could very easily, which I hated Johnny Depp's version, you could very easily hate the character of Willy Wonka.
Sure.
I think in ways that Willy Wonka is darker in some places from what he does in the film. Willy Wonka, he scared me in a couple parts.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
film.
I was
yeah.
as a kid. And
So,
yet, at the
yeah.
end, I was so happy
Yeah.
that it was all a test. And that and he
yeah.
really loved the kid, and the kid was going to have a real home. And you forget all of the stuff and realize, okay, that's just his way of making sure he's found the right kid.
Yep, that's right.
And it works.
It
We'll
does
get
work.
to Willy Wonka eventually. I
At
know.
some
It's
point.
gonna be
So I
great.
can't
Yeah.
wait. I
That'll be
can't
great.
We'll be in our 70s, but that's all right.
It all depends.
That's okay.
Well, no, and while you bring the God line from the 31, for the longest time, that was cut from the movie because they found it offensive back then. And it was later on one of the re-releases, I think in the 60s, where it was restored. And now it is on the DVDs and everything.
Interesting.
From 31, yeah.
But really, that's kind of the whole point of the Frankenstein story. It's not the monster. It's not Frankenstein's monster. It's the fact that this guy has a God complex.
Well, yeah, like Barry said earlier, Dr. Frankenstein is the monster. It's not.
He
It's
is,
not the
absolutely.
creation.
And that is, I guess, a little bit where Gene, he doesn't fall short. It's just different. It's comedy.
Yes.
And he has pushed back against that, but now he's all in. So it's a real interesting character study.
I also like too how we mentioned in this scene, Igor starts calling him Master because he has become
For the first
the
time.
Doctor.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
He's made the switch, and now that's why he's going to start calling him that, because now that's how he sees him.
It's like he knew I was getting close to the end of the minute and saying, did we miss anything? But you're absolutely right.
Yes.
Twice in this minute, and then coming up next minute, he'll refer to him as Master, the first time ever in the movie, and actually is playing the role. He's not trying to one-up him, Walt. He's not trying to play him for a fool. He's not trying to make him a joke or a sport of whatever Igor's got going in his head. He's actually in the henchman role and following orders.
Yeah, and this is, in my mind, the pivotal scene of the movie. You know, this is where...
Well, these minutes here coming up and even into early next week, because this is one of the longer, like a scene of that goes back to back to back before we're shifting around in time or to another location. It is all one contiguous scene that really is the turning point for both the Doctor and the story.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to get to one last thing. There is a moment here at the very end, and I think it is a perfect sort of a microcosm of what's happening in the relationship between these two. If both of them have a sense of love for something, and if that sense of love is translated by what they're touching, watch here in the very waning seconds. Dr. Frankenstein slowly rubs his hand over the chest of his creation. Doesn't even realize that Inga, who's very much enamored now of seeing this doctor who is so focused and doing the job, and she's finding that really appealing, puts her hand over his. And that's exactly how we end this minute.
If he had any brains at all and wasn't obsessed, he would be putting his hand on her
Remember
chest.
at this point right now,
Not the monster's chest.
Yeah, he would use his other hand. Yes,
Right.
I agree. But no, but the monster is like, it's his child. That's why.
But again, it shows to me, this is a natural evolution. When you've worked with somebody and you admire and you see how excited they're getting, it's a turn. I don't want to say a turn on in a bad way. It's you feel that affection turning into something more. And this is where the very first time we see Inga showing that there is something more than just respect or, hey, I've been hired, because we heard at the very beginning that she was hired to help him in the lab. It's more than just a job now. There is a level of development there on her character in terms of affection for him.
Well, she's starting to feel that passion.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I had the hots for a nurse once.
All we need is love.
I did, yeah, that's right.
Well, and when you have a God syndrome or a God complex, you miss some important things in life.
Well, this is where we end it. Her hand on his and his hand on the monster's or the creature's chest. Before we wrap up, Barry, do you have anything? Did we miss anything from your notes?
No, I just think it's interesting how lightning always strikes more than once in the Frankenstein family. Usually, lightning only strikes once. No, that's not true. With Frankenstein,
it's totally not true. It strikes a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And this movie is another proof of that.
Commander Clark, what about you? Anything that we forgot?
I was just bringing up him becoming master, so we got it. Yep.
Master.
It's perfect.
Walt, anything on your side?
No, I'm just excited to get into the next minute and see where this craziness goes.
Well, I know you guys initially said you were coming over here because the FCC was stopping by because they had some questions. Do you think we can get you to come back again tomorrow? You're gonna be free to continue this discussion?
I'll say yes right now, but I have to make a phone call.
Make a quick phone call?
Exactly.
Yeah,
we're not in a holding cell somewhere.
We can't. Well, even for then, we can maybe do it remotely.
Yeah, Skype.
Now, assuming they're not dismantling your gear to make their own movie somewhere else, where can people hear your radio show?
Well, they can hear us on WBHF Radio every Saturday from 10 a.m. till noon. We have a show called BK on the Air. We go on and we talk about movies and TV in the past, the present, the nostalgia,
the future,
and stuff, the future, things that might be, things that have already been,
things on this day,
strange and weird and bizarre things. And if you can't hear it locally, you can hear it at WBHFradio.org or download the free TuneIn app for your mobile phone or device and listen that way.
And if they can't tune in on a Saturday, you run that show on SoundCloud the whole week following.
Into the ground on SoundCloud all week.
And if for some bizarre reason you want to listen to it again, sure, go for it.
SoundCloud app, look for BK on the Air.
You can hear it. They said that.
Well, and usually it's worth the time just to hear the flash the audience.
And all the mistakes we make.
Yes.
Well, that too.
It's always fun.
Those are all planned. That's what all the show prep is for.
The whole show is scripted.
See, we just follow our lines.
That's right.
Yep.
So we hope to hear everybody. It would be nice.
Well, Walt, if somebody's trying to follow along our lines of logic or reason or insanity here for this wilder ride, where can they go?
Where can they go? Well,
I'll tell you where they can go.
I can tell you right now.
Tell me where you go.
The best place to go is www.thewilderride.com. And on there, you're going to find our Patreon page, which is a great place to go to get a little bit more involved if you want to help out with some of our costs. Also, as always, you can go to www.facebook.com/thewilderride, join in some of the conversation, join our listeners group, and get more in depth there. And bonus, you get to see some of the color pictures from the production of the film, which I have found very interesting.
I love the Wilder Ride listener group on Facebook. It's fun to play in.
That is a fun group.
It is.
Come back tomorrow, folks, minute number 44, where we'll start with Inga's hand on Dr. Frankenstein's hand, and it will start off with the line, "This is the moment," and it will end with, "Our greatest dread has always been," and that's where we'll leave it. So you'll have to come back tomorrow to get everything in between and listen to this wilder ride with the Gordon Fisherman.
It's alive.
Why are you shouting?
Do you understand?
It's alive.
Were you attaching the camera?